Marcus stared at the dying Kalari engineer for what felt like hours, though his chronometer showed only minutes had passed. Veltar's words echoed in his mind, "Attack soon, your people not ready." The irony was bitter. He'd come here to spy on potential enemies, only to discover they might hold the key to saving human lives. The medical nano-injector felt heavy in his hand. The device was barely larger than a standard hypospray, but it contained technology that was generations ahead of anything the Kalari possessed. Military-grade medical nanobots that could repair cellular damage, stop internal bleeding, and stabilize a patient long enough for proper surgery. Using it would save Veltar's life, but it would also reveal that Marcus was far more than a simple mechanic. Outside, he heard the heavy footsteps of Sirthak approaching the wreckage. The dragon's massive head appeared in the breach, amber eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "The engineer dies," Sirthak observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, still holding the injector. "You could save him." Marcus looked up sharply. "What makes you think that?" Sirthak's expression was unreadable, but there was intelligence there that made Marcus uncomfortable. "You carry tools that do not match your supposed profession. Your knowledge of Kalari systems is too detailed for a simple mechanic. And most telling of all, you work without fear in the presence of 6 guardian dragons who could tear you apart without effort." The dragon paused, studying Marcus intently. "Only 3 types of humans show such confidence in the face of death: warriors, fools, and those who carry secrets worth dying for." Marcus met the dragon's gaze steadily. "And which do you think I am?" "All 3, perhaps." Sirthak's head tilted slightly. "The question is whether your secrets serve good purposes or evil ones." Before Marcus could respond, one of the surviving Kalari, the female with the broken arm, spoke from across the compartment. Her words were rapid, urgent, directed at Sirthak. The dragon listened, then turned back to Marcus. "Veltar was telling you about the intelligence data," Sirthak said. "Kailana demands to know what he revealed." Marcus looked at the female Kalari, who was watching him with suspicious golden eyes. "He said human colonies were in danger, that an attack was coming." Kailana hissed something that didn't need translation. Sirthak's response was a low rumble that might have been disapproval. "She believes you should not have been told," the dragon explained. "Military secrets are not for alien ears. Even if those aliens are trying to save your lives." Sirthak made that sound that might have been laughter again. "Especially then. The Kalari are a proud species. They would prefer to die with their secrets intact than live in debt to those they consider enemies." Marcus looked down at Veltar, whose breathing had become even more labored. "What about you? What do you think?" The dragon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested careful consideration. "I think that pride is a luxury we cannot afford if innocent lives hang in the balance. Guardian dragons protect all life, not just Kalari life. That decided it." Marcus activated the nano-injector and pressed it against Veltar's neck. The device hissed softly as it delivered its cargo of microscopic healing machines into the engineer's bloodstream. The effect was almost immediate. Veltar's breathing strengthened, and some color returned to his gray skin. Kailana erupted in angry hisses. She tried to rise despite her broken arm, clearly intending to stop Marcus from whatever else he might do. But Sirthak moved his massive bulk to block her path, and she settled back with obvious reluctance. "You have revealed yourself, human," the dragon said quietly. "There will be consequences." "There are always consequences," Marcus replied, monitoring Veltar's vital signs on his medical scanner. The nanobots were working rapidly, sealing internal bleeding and repairing damaged organs. The engineer would live, though he'd need proper medical care soon. Veltar's eyes flickered open, now clear and focused. He looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. "What did you do?" "Gave you a chance," Marcus said. "Now tell me about this attack." The engineer glanced nervously at Kailana, who continued to glare at them both. But when Sirthak rumbled something in the Kalari language, Veltar seemed to make a decision. 3 days from now," he said quietly, "Battle Fleet will strike human colonies in the Centauri Drift, 12 systems, coordinated assault. Your military forces are positioned incorrectly. They expect attack from the north, but it comes from the south. Marcus felt cold despite the ship's restored heating. 12 systems meant millions of civilian lives. The Centauri drift colonies were mostly agricultural worlds with minimal defenses. Relying on the protection of the colonial fleet, if Veltar was right, those ships would be in the wrong place when the attack came. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. Veltar struggled to sit up, wincing as the nanobots continued their work. "Because you saved my life when you had no reason to. Because you are not what either of our species believes about the other." He paused, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. "And because this war should never happen. The military leaders on both sides want conflict, but most of our people simply want to live in peace." Marcus glanced at Kailana, who had been following the conversation through her translator. Her expression had shifted from anger to something more complex: doubt, perhaps, or fear. "She agrees with you?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the female Kalari. Veltar spoke quickly to his comrade in their own language. She responded with obvious reluctance, but her tone was less hostile than before. "She says the war brings honor to warriors but death to civilians," Veltar translated. "She has seen what our weapons can do to populated worlds. It troubles her." Marcus stood and walked to the ship's communication console. The primary systems were damaged, but he might be able to jury-rig a subspace transmission. If he could get word to the colonial fleet, they could reposition in time to counter the attack. But as he began working on the communications array, he realized the deeper implications of what he was doing. Saving the Centauri colonies would prevent a massacre, but it would also expose human intelligence capabilities. The Kalari would know their plans had been compromised, and they'd change their strategies accordingly. More troubling was the source of the intelligence. If Marcus transmitted a warning based on Veltar's information, the engineer would be branded a traitor by his own people. The Kalari dealt harshly with those who betrayed military secrets. "You hesitate," Sirthak observed, watching Marcus work. The dragon had somehow managed to squeeze more of his bulk through the hull breach, and now occupied a significant portion of the compartment. "I'm thinking about consequences," Marcus admitted. "Saving those colonies might doom your friend here, and yet you work to save them anyway." Marcus paused in his rewiring of the communication console. "How do you know what I'm doing?" Sirthak's amber eyes gleamed with amusement. "Because you are exactly what I thought you were, a warrior with a conscience. Such beings cannot stand by while innocents suffer, even if action brings personal cost." The dragon turned his massive head toward Veltar and Kailana, speaking to them in their own language. Both Kalari responded with obvious surprise and what sounded like protests. But Sirthak's responses were firm, leaving no room for argument. "What did you tell them?" Marcus asked. "That they have a choice," the dragon replied. "They can remain silent and become accessories to massacre, or they can help prevent it and accept the consequences with honor." Veltar struggled to his feet, still weak but determined. "We will help," he said quietly. "Show me what you need." The next several hours passed in tense collaboration. Veltar provided access codes for the ship's military communication systems, while Marcus worked to restore enough power to send a subspace transmission. Kailana remained sullen but offered no further resistance. The most challenging part was crafting the message itself. It had to contain enough information to allow the colonial fleet to counter the attack, but not so much detail that it would expose the source. Marcus settled on a format that would look like a routine intelligence intercept star chart showing fleet movements. Encrypted timestamps, tactical assessments that could have come from long-range sensors, but even as he worked, Marcus was implementing his original plan. The surveillance subroutines he'd installed earlier were still active, quietly copying data from the ship's military computers. Navigation logs, communication transcripts, tactical assessments, everything was being duplicated and prepared for transmission. The contradiction wasn't lost on him. He was simultaneously helping the Kalari save human lives while stealing their military secrets. It was pragmatism at its most brutal, but Marcus had learned long ago that survival sometimes required morally ambiguous choices. "The transmission is ready," he announced finally. "But we have another problem." This signal will be intercepted by Kalari listening posts. They'll know the information came from this ship. Veltar nodded grimly. We understand the risks. There might be another way, Sirthak interjected. Guardian dragons are not bound by Kalari military law. If the information came from us, it would be viewed differently. Marcus looked at the massive creature with renewed interest. You're willing to take responsibility for this? My kin and I have discussed this matter. We believe preventing massacre. The repairs took another 18 hours of non-stop work. Marcus pushed himself beyond exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that every minute counted. Somewhere in space, colonial fleet commanders were receiving his warning and scrambling to reposition their forces. The Kalari attack fleet was already moving toward their targets, unaware that their surprise was compromised. Vel-Dashtar proved to be an excellent engineer despite his species' alien physiology. The nanobots had stabilized his injuries enough that he could work, though he moved carefully and took frequent rest periods. Together, they managed to restore the main engine to partial functionality, not enough for sustained high-speed flight, but sufficient to reach the nearest neutral system. Kyle-Ana remained distant but helpful, using her intact arm to assist with tasks that required an extra pair of hands. She spoke little, but Marcus occasionally caught her watching him with an expression of puzzled curiosity, as if trying to understand what manner of creature would risk everything to save enemies. The dragons maintained their vigil throughout the repairs. They took turns landing near the ship to rest, but at least two were always airborne, circling the canyon in wide patrols. Marcus noticed they were facing outward now, watching for threats rather than watching him. The shift was subtle but significant. As dawn broke over the canyon on the second day, Marcus completed the final diagnostic checks on the ship's critical systems. Everything was functional, if not optimal. The Kalari vessel could limp to safety, carrying its crew and its cargo of dangerous knowledge, but Marcus's own situation had become far more complicated than he'd anticipated. His original mission parameters were clear: gather intelligence and return to his handlers without revealing human capabilities or intentions. Instead, he'd exposed advanced medical technology, prevented a massacre that might have served human strategic interests, and formed an unlikely alliance with dragon peacekeepers who might or might not be trustworthy. Worse, he genuinely cared about what happened to Veltar and Kailana. The engineer had risked everything to prevent a war, while the soldier had overcome her own prejudices to support that choice. They deserved better than exile and shame, but Marcus couldn't see how to give it to them. The ship is ready, he announced, powering down his diagnostic equipment. You should reach the Nexus station in about 36 hours if you keep the engine output below 60%. Veltar nodded, then fixed Marcus with a steady gaze. What will you tell your people about us? It was a fair question. Marcus had been wondering the same thing during the long hours of repair work. His debriefing would determine how humanity viewed this encounter, and by extension how they prepared for future contact with both Kalari and dragons. I'll tell them the truth, Marcus said finally. That not all Kalari want war. That some are willing to sacrifice everything to prevent it. And that the dragons may be the key to finding a peaceful solution. And your government will believe you? Marcus smiled grimly. That's not my problem. My job is to provide accurate intelligence. What they do with it is their choice. Sirthak approached the ship, landing with his usual earth-shaking impact. The dragon had become a constant presence during the repairs, offering advice, sharing observations about both species, and occasionally engaging in philosophical discussions that left Marcus questioning his own assumptions about the nature of consciousness and morality. You are troubled, the dragon observed, studying Marcus with those penetrating amber eyes. Shouldn't I be? Nothing about this situation is simple. Simplicity is overrated, Sirthak replied. The universe is complex, and those who seek simple solutions usually create more problems than they solve. The dragon paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. There is something you should know before you depart. My kin and I have made a decision regarding the larger conflict between your peoples. Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of decision? We have chosen to withdraw our support from the Kalari military, Sirthak announced quietly. The alliance that has existed for 3 centuries will end. Veltar and Kailana both stared at the dragon in shock. The announcement clearly came as a surprise to them as well. You cannot, Kailana protested, speaking for the first time in hours. The treaty was based on mutual protection and shared values, Sirthak interrupted. But we no longer share the value that sees war as a solution to diplomatic problems. The Kalari military has chosen a path that leads to unnecessary death. We will not walk that path with them. Marcus understood the implications immediately. Without dragon support, Kalari military capabilities would be significantly reduced. The creatures served as both scouts and heavy assault units in space combat. Their withdrawal would force the Kalari to reconsider their strategic options. This will prevent the war? Marcus asked. It will make the war far more difficult for the Kalari to prosecute, Sirthak confirmed, which should provide time for cooler heads to prevail. On both sides. The dragon turned his attention to Veltar and Kailana. You need not fear exile among your people. When they learn that the dragons have withdrawn support for military action, there will be many who question the wisdom of continuing aggressive policies. You may find that courage has made you heroes rather than traitors. Veltar looked stunned. You would do this for us? We do this for ourselves, Sirthak corrected. And for all who value life over conquest. Your courage has shown us that such values still exist among the Kalari. That gives us hope for the future. Marcus began gathering his tools, but his mind was racing with new possibilities. If the dragons truly withdrew from the alliance, the entire strategic balance would shift. Human intelligence would need to reassess threat levels, military positioning, diplomatic opportunities. His mission had just become exponentially more significant, but as he prepared to leave, Marcus realized there was one more thing he had to do. The surveillance programs he'd installed in the ship's computer contained detailed intelligence about Kalari military capabilities, information that could give humanity a decisive advantage in any future conflict. He'd completed the mission he'd been sent to accomplish. But the mission itself no longer made sense in the context of what he'd learned. The intelligence was valuable, but using it might prevent the peaceful resolution that now seemed possible. Marcus accessed the ship's computer through his portable interface, navigating to the hidden subroutines he'd installed. With a few keystrokes, he could extract terabytes of classified Kalari data. Or, with a different set of commands, he could delete the programs entirely, erasing any evidence that he'd ever been there. Sirthak watched him work with interest, but made no comment. The dragon seemed to understand that this was Marcus's choice to make alone. Marcus thought about the 12 systems that would have been attacked, the millions of lives that had been saved, the possibility of peace that now existed where before there had been only the prospect of war. Then he entered the deletion commands. The surveillance programs vanished from the ship's memory banks as if they'd never existed. Years of planning and preparation erased in seconds. His handlers would be furious when they learned what he'd done, assuming they ever found out. An interesting choice, Sirthak observed. The right choice, Marcus replied, surprising himself with how certain he felt. As he closed his equipment cases and prepared to depart, Veltar approached him with something approaching reverence. I do not understand you, the engineer said quietly. You save enemies, you sacrifice advantages, you risk your career for beings you barely know. What drives such behavior? Marcus considered the question seriously. It was something he'd been wondering about himself during the long hours of repair work. Maybe it's because I've seen what happens when people choose sides over principles, he said finally. I've watched conflicts spiral out of control because everyone was too busy protecting their own interests to consider the larger picture. He paused, looking at the 3 aliens who had become against all odds, something approaching friends. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I just believe that doing the right thing matters more than doing the profitable thing. Kailana spoke in Kalari and Veltar translated. She says such beliefs are rare among warriors of any species. She wonders if there are others like you among the humans. More than you might think, Marcus replied. And I suspect there are others like you among the Kalari, waiting for an excuse to choose peace over war. The leave-taking was awkward but genuine. Veltar offered formal thanks in the Kalari manner, while Kailana managed a gesture that might have been respect. Sirthak simply watched with those ancient, knowing eyes. Will I see you again? Marcus asked the dragon as he prepared to climb out of the ship. Perhaps, Sirthak replied. The universe has a way of bringing together those who serve similar purposes, and I suspect your real work is just beginning. Marcus made his way back to his own ship, a converted cargo hauler that had served him well during his years as an undercover operative. As he powered up the engines and lifted off from the canyon floor, he could see the Kalari vessel beginning its own departure preparations. The flight back to human space gave Marcus time to think about what he'd accomplished and what it meant for the future. His mission report would be unlike anything his handlers had ever. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he approached the smoking wreckage. The alien ship had crashed hard into the rocky canyon, its hull twisted and torn like crumpled paper. Steam rose from the damaged engines, and strange blue fluids leaked from ruptured lines. But what made his blood run cold wasn't the destruction, it was the massive creatures circling overhead. The dragons were nothing like the mythical beasts from Earth's old stories. These were living weapons, each one the size of a small aircraft. Their scales shimmered with an oily black sheen that seemed to absorb light itself. Razor-sharp claws extended from powerful limbs, and their eyes glowed with an unsettling amber fire. Worst of all were their mouths when they opened them. Marcus could see rows of teeth like curved daggers. Designed for tearing through armor and flesh alike, 6 of them circled the crash site, their massive wings beating with the sound of thunder. Each wing beat sent loose rocks tumbling down the canyon walls. They moved with predatory grace, clearly intelligent, clearly dangerous. And they were all focused on him. Marcus had been exploring this sector when he picked up the distress signal. The message was automated, repeating in several alien languages. His translation software had managed to piece together the basics. Ship damaged, crew injured, need immediate assistance. As a freelance mechanic working the Outer Rim colonies, Marcus had answered plenty of distress calls. But never one like this. The ship belonged to the Kalari, a reptilian species that humanity had only recently made contact with. Relations were tense at best. The Kalari controlled several strategic systems that human colonies needed for trade routes. Negotiations had been ongoing for months, with little progress. Some in the human military believed conflict was inevitable, but Marcus wasn't thinking about politics as he stood at the edge of the crash site. His engineer's mind was already analyzing the damage, calculating what tools he'd need, how long repairs might take. It was what he did fix things that were broken. The fact that this particular broken thing belonged to a potentially hostile alien species was just another challenge. One of the dragons landed with earth-shaking force just 30 meters away. Up close, it was even more terrifying. The creature stood nearly 4 meters tall, its neck arched in a predatory curve. Intelligence gleamed in those burning amber eyes as it studied him. Marcus forced himself to remain still, his hand resting casually on his tool belt rather than the plasma pistol at his hip. The dragon opened its mouth and spoke. The words came out as a series of hisses and clicks. But Marcus's translator kicked in after a moment. "Human," the creature said, its voice like grinding metal. "You should not be here. This place brings death to your kind." Marcus took a slow step forward, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "I received a distress signal. Someone needs help." The dragon's head tilted, studying him with predatory interest. "Help?" The word seemed to amuse it. "Your species and ours are enemies." "Why would you offer help to enemies?" "Because someone's hurt," Marcus replied simply. "That's reason enough." For a long moment, the dragon said nothing. The other 5 continued their aerial patrol, occasionally letting out haunting cries that echoed off the canyon walls. Finally, the grounded dragon stepped aside. "The ship contains Kalari survivors," it said. 3 injured, 1 critically. "If you truly wish to help, human, then prove your words with actions. But know this, my kid and I will be watching. Any sign of treachery, and we will end you." Marcus nodded and walked toward the wreckage. As he got closer, he could see the extent of the damage more clearly. The ship had suffered catastrophic engine failure, probably from pushing too hard through a solar storm. The hull breach was severe, but not fatal with the right repairs. This vessel could fly again. He climbed through a rent in the side of the ship, his portable lights cutting through the smoke-filled interior. The design was alien but not incomprehensible. All starships shared certain basic requirements: life support, propulsion, navigation, power. The specifics might vary, but the fundamentals were universal. The first survivor he found was trapped under a collapsed bulkhead. The Kalari was unconscious, green blood seeping from a head wound. Marcus used his portable lifting unit to carefully move the debris, then applied pressure bandages to stop the bleeding. The alien's breathing was shallow but steady. The second survivor was in better shape, conscious, but with a badly broken arm. She watched him with large, golden eyes as he worked, setting the bone and applying a stabilizing cast. Her translator struggled with human words, but she managed to whisper what sounded like gratitude. It was the third survivor that worried him most. Marcus found him in what appeared to be the ship's engineering section, trapped under a massive power coupling that had torn free during the crash. The Kalari's lower body was crushed, and his breathing was labored. Without immediate medical attention, he would die within hours, but more concerning was what Marcus discovered as he examined the ship's systems. This wasn't just any Kalari vessel, it was a military scout ship, equipped with advanced sensors and communication arrays. The kind of ship that would be mapping human colonies, identifying weaknesses, preparing for potential invasion. His hands moved automatically as he began emergency repairs, but his mind was racing. The smart thing would be to help the survivors and leave. Let someone else worry about the implications. But Marcus had never been accused of being smart. When it came to doing the right thing, he started with the life support systems, rerouting power from non-essential systems to keep the survivors alive. The work was delicate, requiring precise adjustments to alien technology he'd never seen before. But machines were machines, regardless of who built them. Current flowed according to the same laws of physics, whether you were human or KHAL. He worked. One of the dragons landed outside the ship with another ground-shaking impact. A few moments later, the massive creature squeezed its head through the hull breach, watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. "You work quickly for someone helping enemies." The dragon observed. Marcus paused in his repairs, looking up at the creature. "Are they your enemies too?" The dragon was quiet for a long moment. "The Kalari are dies. We serve them in exchange for protection of our homeworld. But alliance and friendship are not the same thing." "What's your name?" Marcus asked, returning to his work on a damaged power conduit. "I am called Sirthak. Among my people, I am a guardian." "Marcus," he replied, carefully splicing two alien power cables together. "I'm just a mechanic." Sirthak made a sound that might have been laughter. "Just a mechanic who answers distress calls in hostile space. Who risks his life to save enemies. You are either very brave or very foolish, Marcus who dashes just dash mechanic." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. He'd gotten the power flowing again, and the ship's lights flickered back to life. Environmental systems hummed back online, clearing the smoke from the air. The next challenge was the propulsion system. The main engine had suffered catastrophic damage when the ship hit the canyon wall, but the backup systems might be salvageable. Marcus made his way aft, squeezing through damaged corridors filled with sparking electronics and twisted metal. The engine room was a disaster. Coolant had leaked everywhere, mixing with alien hydraulic fluids to create a toxic soup that made his environmental suit's filters work overtime. But the damage wasn't as bad as it looked. Most of it was secondary burst pipes, fried control systems, damaged housing. The actual engine core appeared intact. Marcus set to work with methodical precision. First, he isolated and drained the damaged coolant lines. Then he began tracing electrical pathways, identifying which systems could be repaired and which would need to be bypassed entirely. It was like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece was alien and potentially lethal. Hours passed as he worked. Sirthak remained nearby, sometimes watching him directly, sometimes communicating with the other dragons in their own language. Marcus caught fragments of their conversations through his translator discussions about human capabilities. Debates about trustworthiness, speculation about his true motives. They weren't wrong to be suspicious. Marcus was hiding something, though not what they might expect. He wasn't a simple freelance mechanic. His real profession was far more complicated and far more dangerous. But for now, he focused on the work. The ship's navigation computer had suffered significant damage, its quantum processors partially fused from power surges. Marcus carefully extracted the damaged components, replacing them with generic substitutes from his kit. They wouldn't be as efficient as the original Kalari technology, but they would function. As he worked on the computer core, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. His modifications were subtle, so subtle that even a detailed inspection might miss them. The navigation system would work perfectly for normal operations. But it would also do something else, something the Kalari would never notice. Every time this ship made a hyperspace jump, it would transmit a tiny data packet. The packet would be encrypted, disguised as routine diagnostic information. To any casual observer, it would look like normal system maintenance. But hidden in that data would be everything. The ship's sensors recorded stellar cartography, fleet movements, communication intercepts. The information would eventually find its way to human intelligence.